Hello and welcome to my shop. My name is Tracy Maxfield and this is Hammer Down Woodworking. I'm working on a butcher block countertop for a customer and I'm fixing to put breadboard ends on it. And I thought I'd take this opportunity to show you how I do that. I'm not doing a build over the whole butcher block. It's just going to be just the breadboard ends. I'm going to be doing haunched tenons on this. I know this is a very intimidating looking joint, but it's not that bad. Anybody can do it. You just have to take your time with it and know what you're doing when you do it. And that's why I'm going to show you my method for laying this out and actually doing these haunched tenons on this breadboard end here. And as you can see, I've got a couple of pipe clamps on here just to hold this still because I don't want it moving after I start marking this. I'll start in the middle and work my way out. And when I get that mark, I don't want to mark here, mark over here, and then this move. And when I go to mark the other side, this breadboard has actually moved. This is going to have 5 haunched tenons in it, one right in the middle and 2 on each side. And they will go 1.5 inches deep inside of this breadboard end. Find center and then work off a center for each piece. And I know where center's at on this. This board is actually 36 inches wide. And each one of these blocks here is 2 inches wide. So this is going to give me my center. I'm going to mark that. Okay, right here is my center mark. That is the center of this board. And I'm going to come out one inch on either side. These tenons are going to be 2 inches wide. And I know that I'm going to be going cutting off of this one back 1.5 inches because 1.5 inches of this material is going to go up into this one. So when I make this mark, I'm going to want to travel up onto this board in the neighborhood somewhere around 2 inches. And that way when I cut my mark away, I've still got 1/2 inch of mark back here that's going to be left, because when I feed this board inside of this one, then that 1/2 inch of mark is going to line up with this one. On this one, I'm going to go center here. I'm going to go to 1 inch to either side of it. I'll just slide it all the way here toward the end. Alright, now I'm going to want my next tenon to fall, the center of it to fall right here, which is, this is my 2 and my 6 inch section. So I'm going to mark right here. No rhyme or reason to this where you place these at. You can place them wherever you want, and that's going to be center of this next tenon. So I'm going to fall back to the left at 1 inch, and I'm going to go over to the right to 1 inch, and I'm going to mark that just like I did the center one a minute ago. You're going to have a mortise in your breadboard end, and your tenon is going to be coming off of your board, your panel. So I'm going to come in 5/8 of an inch. That will be where I will cut the tenon off at, or where I stop cutting the mortise at is 5/8 of an inch from the end of this board, but on this one. When I plunge down into this with a router to make that, I'm going to come down 5/8 of an inch. On this board, on my tenon, my 1/2 inch tenon out here, I'm going to come down 3/4 of an inch, and that's going to give me an 1/8 inch play between the shoulder of the mortise in this and the shoulder of the tenon on this. So I've made 2 marks, and your 5/8 inch mark, there's no need in even bringing it down onto to this. That's going to be where you're going to stop your router. The 3/4 inch mark, and you can mark these differently if you want to. If you want more room, you could actually come over, instead of an 1/8 inch, you could come over even 1/4 inch. I wouldn't come over very much, though, a whole lot. Just need a little room for expansion and contraction. And it is basically rinse and repeat for the other side. Now it's just repeat those steps on the other side. Now that we've got both ends marked, we're going to take the clamps off and bring our lines over the top on our breadboard ends. And also, while I'm at this one, let me go ahead and get this in here too. You'll need to mark, these are exactly where your tenon is going to go. These marks that you bring over, this is 2 inches wide. We're going to need this plunge that's 1.5 inches deep. We're going to need it to actually extend a little bit wider. I'm going to give mine an 1/8 inch on each side, and then that way that panel has room to expand and contract. So just make your plunge into these breadboards. When you plunge down that 1.5 inches for your tenon, you're going to be cutting the tenon 2.5 inches or 2 inches wide on the panel, but you're going to be cutting this mortise, you're going to be plunging down 1.5 inches, 2.25 inches. From center, it's going to be 1/8 inch on each side, wider than 2 inches. Here is my mark for one side of the tenon. Here's my mark for the other. And when I carried those over, I brought them across, but then I added an 1/8 inch this way, and on this one I added an 1/8 inch that way. And just do that same process all the way down your board. So now that we've got our lines brought over the top of the board, we're going to use a router with a 1/2 inch upcut spiral bit to make a 1/2 inch mortise all the way down the center of this breadboard. And at our other marks where our tenons, our haunched tenons are going to go, we're going to plunge down 1.5 inches in between those marks. But first thing we got to do is find center of this board, and since we're using a 1/2 inch bit, this board is it's actually just a little bit over. I left a little bit for sanding, but it's just a little bit over 1.5 inches thick, which that is just a little bit over 1.5 inches thick also. But by the time it's all sanded down, that'll be gone. But nonetheless, we've got to find center of this board and mark it, and then I'm going to mark 1/4 inch to one side, and that'll be what I will line my bit up on, and that will have this centered inside this board here. Now, a quick and easy way to find center is to take a rule and just line it up on one end, and then line the other one up like I've got this at the end of the rule here on this side, and I went to the 4 on this side. So at the 2 inch mark right here will be center of that board. So I'm going to make a mark at the 2 inch mark. And you're probably not going to be able to see that on video. But then at 1/4 inch to either side of that, if I line the edge of the bit up with that, that will give me that 1/2 inch right in the middle of it. I went about 1/8 of an inch at a time until I got down to my 1/2 inch mark, and I'll do the same thing on this other board. If you notice, I've put 2 boards side by side. That gives the router more stability whenever you're taking across. Instead of balancing on a narrow strip, you're balancing it on much wider. That's 3 inches wide, so that's sufficient. And to make sure that you're centered, just flip your boards around and go from the other side. When I looked at this, I was 1/64 of an inch off from my mark. This side here is 1/64 of an inch thicker than this one. So I just turn my boards around and go at it from the other side and take off that 1/64 of an inch. Now, in between our marks for our tenons, we're going to just plunge down and keep taking that material out of there until we get each one of them 1.5 inches deep. And right here's what that piece will look like once you plunge those down. You got 1/2 inch deep right here, and then 1.5 inches right here where these tenons will go. Alright, now that we got our mortises cut in our breadboard ends, it's time to cut the tenon on the end of this, and then we'll match it all up. First thing to do, we're going to mark back 1.5 inches on each side and straight line it, and take a router and start taking this material off. Yeah, stay back off of my line, and I'm going to creep up to that. But I'm going to take it down on each side just a little bit at a time until I finish it out. I drew a line on here, the depth of my cut. Now all I have to do is just pop. I've got about 1/4 inch right here. Alright, I've got this one long tenon cut out. It's 1.5 inches by the full 36 inches. It's just a little bit thick, which is what I wanted. But before I trim this down so that it is the same size as this, instead of cutting all this down on both sides and trying to keep it even, all that, I'm going to go ahead and transfer my marks from my panel back up here on this and go ahead and cut the tenons out, and then that way when I'm trimming these down, making them fit, I can take a shoulder plane or something and finesse them into being a perfect fit and not have to cut the full 1.5 inches on both sides all the way down. I can trim a little bit on one side, put my board up there, see what I need, flip the panel over, trim a little bit on that. So that's what I'm going to do now. Now that I've got these lines brought all the way back out here to the end of the board, those are my saw lines for my full tenon that's going to go all the way back up in there. There's also going to be a 1/2 inch tenon all the way down this, so we'll mark that now. Mark some of this with white, the X's, so you can see what will be cut out. Of course, it'll show up a whole lot better once you'll see what it looks like once I've cut it all out. But basically you're going to have 3/4 inch on each end. You'll have 2 inch tenons at 5 different places and 3/4 inch on the other end. After cutting all this out, then I just take I've got a Shinto rasp, and I just bring all these down to my line and level them up. You want to make sure that you get them down to or just slightly past your line. That way you have enough room for them to go in without hitting anything, because you've got a 1/2 inch track cut in that breadboard end. Alright, now that we got all those tenons cut out, we got a continuous 1/2 inch tenon all the way down with 3/4 inch on each side. Got 5 on this one because it's a wide 5 haunched tenons. The only two things left to do is, one is to round over the edge of these tenons and this 1/2 inch tenon on each end. Round the corners those over, because we done that with a router bit in that breadboard end, and it's got round corners, so instead of squaring those up, it's easier just to round these off. And then I've left this slightly oversized, so I've got to take it down just a little bit on each side until that breadboard end just slides right down over it. And here's something what that should look like, just rounded over. And there that is. Now we got to make some dowels, drill some holes, and we'll tie this thing on. Now that we got our haunch tenons cut out and our mortises made in our breadboard ends, it's time to mark the placement for the hose where we're going to place the dowels. Now this center one, it will be fixed. It will be glued and fixed. But the two on each side of the center one to the outside, they're going to have a wider slot in it for the dowel to actually be able to walk back and forth in it, to give just a little bit of expansion and contraction to these on each side. So we'll do that now. Now, I don't know how well you can see this on this pencil mark on this walnut, but right here's my tenon. It's 2 inches wide. I went right in the center, which is where my previous mark was at when I centered my tenons. But went 1 inch in, and the tenon is 1.5 inches long, so I went 3/4 inch up. That's what this mark is, and where that crosshair is at on each one of them, that's where I'll drill my 3/8 inch hole. I'm going to be using 3/8 inch dowel, so I've got my drill press all set up. Got a brad point bit, 3/8 inch brad point bit in here, and To save blowing out inside this mortise, I stuck a piece of, that's a 1/2 inch tenon that goes in there, so I took a piece of 1/2 inch stock and just slid it in between there, and then that way when I go through this first layer of this, it's not going to blow out in the middle and give me a bunch of cleanup. And of course I've got a board on the bottom of it that will also save me from blowing out the other side. So we're ready to drill. Now that I've got everything pulled up here the way that it's supposed to be, then I'll mark through the breadboard into the tenon as to where the hole's going to be drilled in it. And I'll do that by using the same 3/8 inch brad point bit that I drilled these holes with. I'll use the brad on the center of that to mark where I'm going to drill. I slid my combination square 1/32 of an inch back toward the panel itself, and I'm going to drill 2 holes in it, one on each side, and then file out that middle, so that dowel will act as a pulling mechanism to pull that breadboard toward that tenon, toward the panel. We're going to glue this center one. And once everything's pulled up the way we want it, put a little glue on your dowel. And this center one, you can just drive it in. Now that everything on this end is pulled up, clamped up real tight like it's supposed to be where it goes, now I'm going to take my other dowels, I'm going to go ahead and cut those, and I take a sander and put just a little bit of chamfer on the bottom end, that way it has that room to bend and go around that offset hole in that tenon. But we don't glue it all the way through, we glue it just a little bit on the bottom side and a little bit on the top side. Then the only thing left to do after you get all your dowels flush trimmed is to either sand or plane it down flush with your panel. Well, that'll do it for this one. I hope you found that helpful. I know this is a fairly intimidating looking joint, but it's not that bad, really. It's not. Anyone can do it. You can do it. Just some simple layout tools and a router, a dado stack, whatever. The only reason why I've done this right here with a router, I normally use a dado stack cutting this tenon, but this panel is 1.5 inches thick and it is so big and so heavy. It's just not something I felt comfortable with shoving it across a dado stack by myself. So I decided to do it with a router and then tune it with a hand planes. But anyway, there that is. If you like the content, give me a thumbs up. If you like what we're putting out, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And until next time, thanks for watching.